So this is a photo of Richard Hanania. I'm highlighting this photo because he was actually very proud of having, for whatever reason, taking this photo. He even made a gender transition joke for whatever reason surrounding this photo. And he's a conservative commentator. And the reason why he's been on my radar recently is whenever there's anything that happens, I mean, he sort of views himself as a kind of like heterodox conservative thinker, right? He doesn't stand for the typical, reactionary right-wing bullshit that we've come to understand from reactionaries in America. With like any kinds of psychology, whether it's like liberal psychology, right, or conservative psychology, people just like you give them enough inputs and they can't really help themselves. One way that he's absolutely not heterodox at all is the fact that he's always making a point to comment on these sort of like, let's just call them like street crime situations, right? I remember, for instance, he posted this thing. The reason why it's deleted is because he had to delete it, right? So Richard Hanania or Hanania, not exactly sure how to pronounce his name. He was basically like posting this video from Chicago where a woman, or perhaps the man that she was with, not exactly clear, was attacked by like a large group of teenage kids. And he said something along the lines of, well, look, pogroms, racial pogroms are actually happening at like alarming rates in America. But the victims and the targets are not who you think they are, right? And he was basically just sort of like making the comment, I guess, that really it's white people that are being preyed upon in these racial pogroms by Black Americans and by Hispanics or by whoever else in America. This is clearly like a comment from somebody who has never been in any kind of dangerous situation in his life, right? So the tweet that I subtweeted, so saw this on Reddit and thought, meaning I saw that video on Reddit and I thought, this is Richard Hanania's, or Richard Hanania, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his name. This is Richard Hanania's next post. Anyway, an ignorant statement which reveals much about the speaker's upbringing, social circles, and fears, has never been in dangerous situations, and doesn't understand predation. A virgin writing treatises on threesomes. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Now, my pronunciation is not always perfect, as you have seen. If you're actually somebody, you as a white person, let's say, for a very long period of time, have lived in areas that were, primarily Black, right? Or you went to a primarily Black high school, as my high school was. You actually, in those situations, you actually start to understand things very, very quickly, right? One thing that I've come to understand very quickly is the fact that my experiences in my neighborhood right now, they are actually very different from other people's experiences in this neighborhood. My neighbors, they have told me stories about times when they've either been mugged successfully or unsuccessfully. They've told stories about, being jumped by a big group of kids and, then like getting the car and then kind of like roving around trying to like find them and beat them up, like typical street shit that you would see. Another neighbor told me she was sitting in her car, another car pulled up, pulled out a gun, was threatening her, and then just drove off. Like even in those kinds of situations, honestly, usually nothing even transpires. I mean, that should be common sense. The majority of times when, a gun is seen or involved or whatever, it usually does not end in somebody's murder. Another neighbor, right? And I should have heard this for whatever reason, but I must have slept through it. It was like the middle of the night. He got into some sort of altercation with somebody. I don't know exactly what the context was. And it was like midnight or past midnight, and they were just like banging in, trying to get in the house, kicking the doors, trying to like break stuff apart, trying to get in. And so I keep hearing about these stories, right, that other people tell me. And the one thing that I'm noticing is everybody that's telling me this story, right, they don't look like me, right? They're not white. And here I am, I'm walking around everywhere, right? I'm walking to the west side of my neighborhood, to the east side, to the north side, to the south side, 20, 30, 40 block radii. I go to the industrial sections, high asthma rate, that kind of thing, high pollution. I walk around there. I walk through the parks, right? Despite the fact that I do this morning, day, and night, to the point where like even people that I don't know, they do recognize me. they say things to me. Despite the fact that I'm everywhere all the time, I have literally in like a very long, I'm not talking about 1 or 2 years, a very long time. The only things that I've seen is as follows. I saw before the pandemic, 2 guys breaking into a car. And after the pandemic, I noticed there was a situation where 2 other guys were breaking into in some other place into another car. There's a reason why violence does not typically come my way. And it is precisely and exactly based on the fact that I am white. If I'm going to be walking around my neighborhood and I'm going to be I always obviously look like I know where I'm going, right? That's like the first thing that you have to understand, right? I mean, I live here, right? I know where I'm going. You put me in a random street, I'm going to find my way back to my house very easily. Don't worry about it. Doesn't matter where I am. Doesn't matter what time of day. Doesn't matter what time of night. I'm going to find my way pretty quickly without a phone. People don't want to come up to me, right? Because I'm the only white person. And when I walk, the reason why I'm nursing this foot is when I walk extremely fast, right? I walk very, very fast. I have my phone out. I'm doing work. I'm writing on the phone, right? I'm getting stuff done. You don't want to come up to me because I don't look like I belong here, right? I look like I might be a cop. I look like I, might have a gun, right? So that's the first thing that I recognize about Richard Hanania, or Hanania, not exactly sure how to pronounce his name. I noticed right away that the fact that he keeps opining on crime, the fact that he keeps opining on that's what I was saying earlier about like he's not able to like totally escape typical conservative psychology. He's still 100% that guy, right? I mean, you've seen this those like tabloid stories or the news stories, News at 9 or like whatever. Do you know where your children are? All that stuff that's like come to be associated with the 90s. He still has never broken out of that mindset, right? He's still a guy fixated on crime. Why? Because he's probably from situations, right, where he, I don't know if he went to public school, but he probably didn't go to public school, right? At least not for any extended period of time. And if he did, I doubt the people there looked anything other than what he looks like. I doubt he's ever been, physically in a place where he had to either escalate or de-escalate, right? Defend himself in some place. I doubt that has ever transpired for him. So he's essentially this. I mean, he's a virgin writing about threesomes. If he had ever lived in the black neighborhood, the first thing he would have noticed is that nobody wants to, forget about, preying on him. Nobody really wants to deal with him. And the longer that you stay in these places and the longer that you become a fixture, the less that people want to deal with you because there's something a little bit off about you. Why are you here? Why aren't you scared walking around? Why do you look like you know where you're going? Oh, does it mean that you're not just like walking around here? You're not just like working here? You're not going to like forget about this place like when you go home for the day? So Richard Hanania, or Hanania, not exactly sure how to pronounce his name, when he has this kind of commentary, especially the fact that he's like really into like IQ, specifically race and IQ, but he might also be interested in stuff like, I don't know, like, increasing IQ, like I said earlier, right? There's this thing that used to happen in the 90s and 2000s on internet forums, right? When people were like obsessed with lengthening their penises, right? They were jelqing and penis lengthening exercises, right? Now the new thing is, how are we going to increase our IQs, right? That's the new penis lengthening exercise for people that think that they are, they have transcended those kinds of concerns. And one thing that I mentioned before was the fact that for some of these people, some of these like conservative writers, right? And this is a guy that he works for a think tank, and he seems to have written academic papers, but he's so kind of like outside of the sphere of like everyday material, day-to-day reality that whenever it like butts up against him, he can't even understand it. He can't even comprehend it. And it made me think of the whole kind of like IQ debate, right? Where people are like, well, there are some people in this world, such as, sub-Saharan Africans who have such low IQs, like sub 70, sub 60, sub 50, they wouldn't even be able to function in society. What about the fact that we have these conservatives who they read all these books and they write all these articles and they spend so much time thinking about crime, right? But they're never actually around it. And physically, like as soon as they're sort of dropped in this kind of situation, they become these total virgins. They totally reveal how little they understand of these kinds of like basic dynamics, right? In neighborhoods or just like interpersonally. And it made me think. So if you actually measure their level of, let's say, coherence with that reality, their intelligence in that kind of situation, this guy, Richard Hanania or Hanania, not exactly sure how to pronounce his name, he would probably score, sub 50 IQ. If we could get a measure, he totally does not belong in the real world, right? As it's lived. This is for him. And just to sort of like show exactly how far, right, he takes and how silly he gets, right? Of course, like as more pieces of the news come out and he starts commenting on all this, this is a tweet that he did highlighting a Reddit thread from 9 years ago. So this happened back in, 10 years ago actually now, although it says 9. This happened back in 2013. So, right. So Jordan Neely, right, he used to do these imitations. And somebody on Reddit decided to write this like about 10 years ago, right? So try to stay away from the Michael Jackson impersonator if you see him, right? This was in the Manhattan subreddit 10 years ago. Used to be all cool, dancing to MJ in the subway train, but as of late, he's become a maniac, all right? So keep in mind what's being said. This is a guy who used to be normal, right? You could tell by his face, right? There is at least some level of happiness here. There's some level of coherence and usefulness like within society. And now he's a maniac, right? So we're talking about that from that 2007 period when he's 14 and he understood that his mother was murdered and stuffed into a suitcase up until whatever this is, 2013. So we have a 6-year window where people say that he's getting progressively more schizophrenic, crazier, stranger, maybe is not used to doing what he used to do, right? In this case, he's not even dancing anymore. He used to dance, right, based on some of the interviews that I've read. He used to dance as a kind of therapy, right, to deal with the PTSD. That's why he was dancing and eventually turned into an act. Sometime in late spring, early summer, I saw him in the train, his radio fucked up, and he was angry as fuck, cursing and bad-mouthing commuters, screaming, "What the fuck are you looking at? Don't fucking look at me." Totally didn't expect him to act as such. Ever since that day, he's just been a scary dude to me. He doesn't dress up anymore, no more dancing, just asks for money, occasionally shouting obscenities. Right, he assaulted some woman, he assaulted a man, he was dragging some like little girl like in the street, right? So he definitely was a disturbed guy. But this is Richard Hanania, or Richard Hanania, don't exactly know how to pronounce his name. This is what he thinks is an appropriate response to this Reddit thread from 10 years ago. You've got to hand it for Jordan Neely. These types often have a long criminal record. They rarely also have a long Reddit paper trail of them terrorizing a city. Leftists sure know how to pick their martyrs. Now, there's a few things here. So Richard Hanania, or Hanania, not exactly sure how to pronounce his name. He's actually a writer. And what's shocking about this tweet is just how absolutely poorly, and this is just so poorly communicated. So like before we even get to like the meat and the potatoes, right? That's a phrase that I learned recently. The meat and potatoes of the situation. He's saying leftists sure know how to pick their martyrs. And immediately I think, who exactly is doing the picking and the choosing? Because like I said earlier, first of all, if all that happened was this was a homeless man who was wilding out and he was knocked out by someone in the subway and it ended up in some sort of like, compendium video, you wouldn't hear anything about it, right? People would laugh, people would comment, they'd point their fingers, but there wouldn't be any kind of situation, right? It would be a kind of like open shut case. Now, secondarily, if what happened was this man was put in a chokehold and he died, and yet there was no video, or maybe there weren't even witnesses, let's say, probably nothing would have happened either. Like maybe there would have been some outcry, maybe there would have been like, but without a video, obviously things they're not able to like go anywhere. You're just, if you're dead without this kind of video evidence, nothing's going to happen really. No, like nobody's actually picking any martyrs, right? The way that martyrs get made, martyrs are actually like in the real world, what happens is they get manufactured, right? They get manufactured based on the circumscribed limits of the society that they live in. So for example, If you are born black in New York City, right, you have a much higher chance than average to end up homeless. That's just a fact, right? You have a much higher than average chance of being murdered. You have a higher than average chance of having, like various family dysfunctions, school dysfunctions. So like you're very likely to be in a bad crime-ridden neighborhood. You're very likely to be in a school that's like not a great school. Again, I'm just speaking from experience, right? I'm not just like bullshitting you. That's how martyrs ultimately are made, right? Because the vast majority of the people that I've just mentioned that would be in these kinds of situations, they don't come out of the other end of it dead, right? They don't come out of the other end of it serial criminals. They don't come out on the other end of it, executed by a cop, right? That usually doesn't happen, right? Most people, they sort of live and work and die in the situation that they're in. But every once in a while, human behavior being what it is, which is a probability space, probabilistically, statistically, however you want to phrase it, what's going to happen is eventually one of these outlier situations are going to hit and you will become a ready-made martyr. Now, the reason why the word martyr is often appropriate here is if you see, for instance, like the generic homeless person, let's say you're walking through Brownsville and you see some, black guy on the floor in like a puddle of piss. You could put up posters of that man. You could say, why aren't we doing anything about the homelessness in New York City? Why aren't we offering housing to these people? You could capture it on video and you could put it up on YouTube. Nobody's going to care, right? Because everybody has walked past, stepped over, or seen, maybe not a homeless man drunk in his own piss in Brownsville, because again, right, people are very, very careful about the neighborhoods that they walk through, right? They're going to be very, very selective, right? They don't want to be in a place that's a little too dangerous, right? They don't want to be in a situation where they get a little scared from a sudden movement or somebody having an episode where then they have no choice but to murder someone, right? They don't want to be in that situation, right? Because think about it, they spend their whole lives fantasizing about what am I going to do here? Which is honestly why Richard Hanania, which is why like we have like so many of these types on Twitter and elsewhere. They've prepared their whole lives like watching this from the sidelines. They're very scared to actually be in a situation like this, but all their lives mentally, right? They just keep preparing for this one moment, the one moment when I'm going to have to save a subway car, the one moment when I'm going to have to deal with a real situation, the one and only moment in my entire life. And this is where it gets dangerous, okay? This is where it gets dangerous. The one and only moment in my entire life when I am tested, not as a 12-year-old, not as an 8-year-old, not as a 16-year-old, not as a 20-year-old, but a 30-something man. For the first time, I'm being tested as a man. I am now in a very hyper masculine situation. It's actually very dangerous, right? When we talk about like diversity and inclusion and affirmative action, all that, one of the most obvious answers for why affirmative action or diversity in general, whether it's like linguistic or artistic diversity, like whatever it might be, the reason why diversity is actually so good and so useful and so powerful is by being around all kinds of situations and by being tested in a natural way, right? As a man or as a boy, you don't have to actually spend, your early adulthood and your middle adulthood fantasizing about how you would respond if you do get tested for the first time in your life as a fucking 35-year-old. You won't have to have this kind of explosion that comes out at the other end of it. You actually have an entire lifetime at that point in a diverse setting of dealing with things that make you uncomfortable, dealing with people that don't look like you, that don't act like you, that don't have your background. That's actually very useful. That actually will tone down and de-escalate some of these situations naturally. If I see a homeless guy spazzing out like that, I don't attach any particular meaning to there. Not in the way that this, ex-Marine did, and certainly not the way that Richard Hanania would attach. To just like wrap up this sentence, these martyrs are made simply through the course of living. Eventually, you're going to have outliers. This is what they look like. If you take a photo, take a video of a more generic situation, nobody cares, right? The only time that somebody gives a fuck is like if you have a video of George Floyd being literally choked to death in front of you. This is physically what people respond to viscerally. And there's always this kind of like unspoken tendency among reactionary types to try to defang that kind of response. They try to totally defang it and say, no, 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 no. You cannot use these videos. You cannot use these situations. You cannot make these kinds of appeals. The one thing that's actually left for people to respond to, for people to appeal to, for people to have any kind of response to, that is being systematically taken away. But the most amazing thing, I mean, beyond the fact that it's just so horribly written and he has no idea what he's talking about, and it's just like it's totally just, this is not a coherent statement, right? To pick their martyrs, just point blank, just not coherent. But I think even the more amazing part of all this is the fact that he's able to read this, and he's so, right, you could just look in his face, he is so absolutely sheltered his whole life, right? He's so sheltered his whole life that he's able to read that thread about a man who in 2007 watches his mother, or hears of his mother, I'm not sure exactly what it was, get murdered and stuff into a suitcase, develop all these mental problems as a result, start to cultivate a dance routine to help him through some of these issues. He's able to see that, and he's able to see, well, there was a timeline where this guy was perfectly normal, was not getting arrested, was not in any kind of bad situation. He was just putting on dance routines for money in happy, normal fashion on the subway. And something bad happened here. And there's no empathy for it. There's no like, wait, what the fuck was the city doing? Why wasn't he offered some kind of health care? Why wasn't he offered food? Why wasn't he offered housing? Why did he have to ultimately end up in this situation 10 years after this? Okay. Like he thinks this long criminal record, he's able to see 10 years of this from a guy who used to be totally normal. And he's not asking the questions that need to be asked, right? He's not asking, why wasn't he allowed some other way out? Why was this kind of spiraling out of control, progressively getting worse and worse and worse, and nobody intervened? And by intervene, I don't mean beat him with a baton. I don't mean imprison him for 5 years. I mean, get to the point where before arrests have to happen, right? He's also like, there was this warrant out for his arrest since November 2021. He punched a woman, it seems, on the train. And it's amazing to me how that gets presented as something that is like beyond comment, as if the number one comment should not be, isn't that weird? We have an 18-month warrant for a guy that can't be found. And the reason why he can't be found is he doesn't have a home. Don't you think there's a connection here with all these items? Don't we think this endpoint with him dying at 30, isn't there a causal chain somewhere? It doesn't have to be, look, not every causal chain that looks like this ends with this particular link. But the reason why we're talking about this specific causal chain is because this specific causal chain, this specific instantiation of a man who goes from being normal to mentally ill to homeless, this specific instantiation of this specific kind of causal chain just happened to end in a way where we have video evidence of what looks like, to me, a murder. Like this is it's just so superficial, isn't it? Right? This is as deep. Right? I heard this said about Ben Shapiro before, and I thought it was nice. Ben Shapiro and Richard Hanania, right? Deep as a puddle of piss. And, the reason why conservatives tend to be so kind of, they tend to be so sympathetic to, for instance, Daniel Penny and other types like that, or George Zimmerman, is they always imagine themselves like, look, I could be in that situation. And you know what? I would be scared enough that I would not behave any differently, right? So this is what we need. We need the Richard Hananias or Hananias. We need the Ben Shapiros. And we need all the conservative types to be forced, right, into some sort of, I don't want to call it like a labor re-education camp, but it would be good if they could be in some kind of camp for like 10 years. It's just a neighborhood, guys, right? It's just a neighborhood where people don't look like you. And you're going to have to learn how to deal with people and deal with situations that you're not used to, so that over time, what happens is you actually acclimate to and get a better understanding of the entire range of behaviors and potentialities and problems and solutions and styles of escalation and de-escalation. All those things could finally be in your head, okay? So you don't have to actually write, Richard, from the perspective of someone that has zero experience with anything that you're writing about. You could actually start from baseline assumptions that make some kind of sense. Because overwhelmingly, the craziest thing about all this is just how totally lacking in common sense all of this is. And I promised I was going to share a story here, right? And you'll have my face and you'll have Richard's face next to mine as I share the story. So I used to work actually in a school. Well, I worked in many different schools a very long time ago. A very long time ago, I was working in a school in the Lower East Side, and there were kids coming from the Baruch houses, right? Housing projects in the Lower East Side, from the Alphabet City, which is a little bit, I guess, a little bit north of the Lower East Side. Alphabet City projects, right? All these kids, right? They were coming into the school. And I had to deal like with kind of like the, let's just call it like the worst case scenarios. And I remember like being outside with some kids, right? These are kids that I knew. It was about maybe 6 or 8 of them, I forget. I knew these kids, and I knew also that they had issues with some other kids. A couple of those kids were in a local. It wasn't like a Bloods in the way they would think of it. It was like a Bloods affiliated gang. And there was another kid that I also knew, but he wasn't actually at my school. And they saw each other across the street. They exchanged some words. The kid across the street, also that I knew, he crossed the street to the kids. And before I knew it, I was in a situation where I was pinning this kid down, right? So he was either 15 or 16 years old, right? Just imagine this, like he's a big fucking black kid. He was trying to get at this other kid in the group, right? Kid that wasn't in my school, this little fucking white kid. And you could tell every time that he was not in his medication, he was a totally different person, right? If he's on his medication, you would not have any incidents with this kid. He'd always be sitting there doing his work. If sometimes when I was going over to that school, I would go, I would tutor him. And he was listening there. There was no problems at all. When he's off his meds, remember when I said you could tell by people's faces? I'm not just saying that. This kid, when he was off his meds, his face he would be sitting there like, and he could be doing that for an hour straight, 2 hours straight. Somebody comes up to ask him to do this. They're like, you, fuck off. I don't want to fuck off. Like totally off. Big fucking badass black kid. He wants to get at this tiny, but also really badass white kid, right? So this is one of the few white kids. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to have to like get this guy down and get him down. For 15 minutes straight, I'm essentially just trying to get security, right? I'm trying to get somebody to deal with the situation, right? Because I know right away that, first of all, I'm not going to put a kid into a chokehold. And I'm not going to do it despite the fact that this kid is bigger than me. He's off his meds. And despite the fact that, unlike, right, again, to go back to Daniel Penny, he had 3, potentially 4 other men, adult fucking men next to him that could help him restrain this tiny homeless guy. I don't have anybody helping me. Like, of course, like sometimes kids, they want to help, but I'm not going to have a fucking kid help me restrain another kid, right? They're not supposed to be involved, right? If you're in a situation where you're the adult, or alternatively, you're in a situation where you're the only sane person involved, sorry, if you want to be a hero, such as me pinning this kid down, or you on the train trying to like, get this guy to stop spazzing out, you suddenly have a ton of responsibilities, okay? And I was very aware of my responsibilities. No chokeholds, no crazy shit like that. If I have to get him down and push him down and keep him down, I'm going to do that. And that's what I did. I was extremely sore the next day, right? At the time, I was deadlifting, I was squatting, I was running pretty much every single day. And still, I was sore as fuck after those 15 minutes of just like trying to keep the kid down and making sure that other kids aren't trying to come to help me, okay? I'm the adult in that situation. Daniel Penny is essentially the adult in that situation. If you want to be a hero, you're going to have to take on the responsibility and the liabilities of a hero. And guess what? 15 minutes pass. I'm able to finally offload responsibility to an authority figure. I'm not a dumb fuck. I know exactly what my job is. My job is to find that authority figure that actually deals with this, right? I'm not there to deal with kids having fights. 15 minutes come by. I see them kind of like languorously kind of like walking in like, oh, what's going on, guys? You know, just typical like fucking like pig cop. The same fucking pig shit that you see in the subways, not doing anything fucking useful. Just pig fucking behavior. Pig fucking behavior on the subways. Pig fucking behavior in the fucking schools. I'm fucking acting like a cop. They're spending such a long time languorously walking over as if there's not a real situation here, right? With kids that are little gang members. This was a guy off his meds. The next day, he didn't want to sue me. His mom wasn't mad at me. The next day, when he was on his meds, well, actually, it wasn't really the next day. He actually took a couple of days off from school after that. But when he came back like a few days later on his meds, I saw him across the street. We said hello. We talked. We acted as if nothing happened. Because guess what, bitch? From my perspective, bitch, nothing did fucking happen, bitch. Back then, you were not on your fucking meds. Okay? You were not on your fucking meds. You were not in your right mind. I'm not going to hold that shit against you, stupid fuck. Like, this is not a person in his right mind, you dumb fuck. Isn't it like so kind of amazing that I could be in that situation? And of course, it would be like, well, of course, Alex, you'd be sued. You're white. You're the only white person there. You're pinning down a black kid. He's screaming. You're waiting for the cops to come. No, I had a good relationship with this kid. I had a good relationship with the other kids that he was trying to fight. I had good relationships. So when I was walking around the next day, the week after, 5 weeks after, every single day you treat anew. Okay? You know how to escalate. You know how to de-escalate. You be enough in these kinds of situations, and guess what? It's not going to matter, right? You're not going to overreact. You're going to know exactly what you should do, exactly what you shouldn't do. Instead, we have a Marine here who, according to himself, decided to go on an adventure, did not quite get the adventure he was hoping for, came back to New York City, to a rougher neighborhood than he's used to compared to fucking West Islip, West Babylon, New York, gets himself into a situation because he's too excited. Okay? Again, nobody sued me. Nobody went after me. Nobody was mad at me. Why would they be? I did what I was supposed to do, right? And I did it with people that I built trust with. There was no attempt to build any kind of trust. There was no attempt to do any kind of de-escalation. There was no attempt to get anyone to back down. It was just literally a murder caught on video, right? And for all the fucks out there that disagree with me, put up your own little fucking background. I want to know, what neighborhood are you from? And not only where are you from, but where do you live right now? Because a lot of people that look like me, what they do is they get a little bit of money, they get a little bit of educational attainment, they get a little bit of professional advancement, and they just move out and they never see any of the stuff that they grew up with ever, ever, ever again. Right? So forget about your past. I want to know, where are you from right now? What do you do right now? What does your neighborhood look like? Do you walk around at night? Do you walk around during the day? Are you fearful? Do you clutch your purse? Because you could tell this guy is definitely wearing a fucking purse. One point that he raises that is correct is the fact that we are in this kind of arrested development state, right? Where kids who maybe would have had to mature maybe in a way that's kind of like more congruent with their biology, maybe a little bit earlier, they now have this like arrested childhood, like well into their 20s or perhaps even beyond. But the irony is that, perhaps the reason why this fascinates him so much is this is exactly the state that he is in, right? Like this is look, this is what a child says. This is what a child writes, right? It's crazy. This is baby shit. This is baby shit, right? This is easy ass, easy peasy, lemon squeezy baby shit. And he doesn't get it, right? So he himself is in this like totally arrested childhood. I really want to see all these types, and this actually applies to liberals too. Obviously, forget just penning up conservatives in these neighborhoods. Put all the liberals, put all the Robin DiAngelos, right? Because she's been so. That's the thing. She grew up in some of this rough and tumble environment, was homeless, living in cars when she was small, had hunger. So I respect that part of Robin DiAngelo. But by the time that she's writing White Fragility, she's already a big name diversity trainer. She already self-admittedly moved out of these neighborhoods and is now in these kinds of like almost exclusively white surroundings. Put them back. Remind her, put them in these neighborhoods, right? Have them live there for not 3 months, not 6 months. Give them 5 years. Give them 10 years. And I guarantee you that these kinds of stupid assumptions, they're simply not going to exist anymore. Like this is how, conservatives want to talk about social engineering as a fear, but this is how you do real social engineering, right? Get the virgins writing about threesomes and BDSM and all this other shit. Get them out. We need to replace this professional writerly class with something else altogether, because right now this is not cutting it. The people that would have the perspectives that are valuable, they don't tend to come from the places that we need them to come from. They tend to be what you see in front of you right now, and it's fucking embarrassing. So, I mean, what else is there to say? 2007 to 2013, 6 years of normalcy. After a while, all those problems, all those traumas, they caught up with him, and guess what? The social contract was violated. He was supposed to have received some kind of help. He was supposed to have avoided, what was it, like 40 arrests or whatever it was, right? For public drinking. Mostly it was like fare evasion and public drinking and whatever. He should not have been there on the train screaming about being hungry, being thirsty, and saying essentially, therefore, I am now desperate, right? Everybody always wants to focus on that final little link in the causal chain. Look, he's saying that he's desperate now. Look, he's behaving like a cornered animal. Look, we could now do whatever the fuck that we want to do so that we don't feel fearful. We could, if we feel fearful, if we think this person is more dangerous than he is, we could do whatever we want, because we, in our little world, the world of Richard Hanania or Hanania, don't exactly know how to pronounce his name, that world, right, it needs to be protected at all costs, right? We need to be sheltered. We don't know what's out there. It's so scary. We've been watching the same headlines since the 90s, but we haven't actually lived those headlines. So these are our imaginations. These are our imaginings. And now I'm going to take my imagination, and it's so important, right? His imagination, his fucking imagination is so goddamn important and special and vast, right? He had so much leisure in his life that there was no space for anything except what can you fill this big fucking empty imagination with? What can you fill it up with? What can you fill it with? And it's full of cobwebs. It's full of fears, right? And if you infringe upon these imaginations, we're going to fucking kill you, right? Don't make me scared. Don't make me scared. I don't know how dangerous you are. I have never seen somebody screaming around me. I have never felt that my masculinity was ever tested in any situation. So if I overreact after systematically keeping all of this out of my life, I don't have to see this. I don't want to see this. Fuck off. After keeping all this out of my own life, I'm going to allow my imagination to take over, and I'm going to fucking kill you. I mean, there's no other way to view it, right? So, Dick Hanania, right? It was nice knowing you, but you really are fucking sub 50 IQ, right? You really are just dumb.